My boss is coming, and I'm tired of looking like I married beneath me.
Hide it. My wife's fingers closed around my wrist so fast it almost looked like panic. We were standing just outside the ballroom doors of the Halston Grand, under a chandelier, so large it made everyone beneath it seem smaller than they really were. Waiters in black jackets slipped through the marble lobby, carrying trays of champagne. A violin arrangement drifted softly from somewhere inside the fundraiser, polite and expensive, the kind of music meant to reassure wealthy people that they were exactly where they belonged. And right there, with the elevator doors about to open and half the executive team already turning our way, my wife leaned closer and hissed through a smile that never reached her eyes. "Take off that ring," she whispered. "My boss is coming, and I'm tired of looking like I'm married beneath me." For a second, I just looked at her, not because I hadn't heard her, because after 12 years of marriage, it still stunned me how quietly cruelty could arrive. Not with shouting, not with broken glass, not with a slammed door, just a soft voice, a practiced smile, and a sentence sharp enough to open a man clean down the middle. She let go of my wrist and straightened the front of my jacket like she was helping me, like she was doing me a kindness. "Please, Daniel," she said more lightly this time, glancing toward the elevator. "Just tonight, don't embarrass me in front of people who matter, people who matter." I remember those 4 words more clearly than I remember the violin music, more clearly than the clink of crystal, more clearly than the heat of the ballroom lights on my face. People who matter. The elevator chimed, the doors slid open, and the man my wife had been trying so hard to impress all year stepped out with 2 board members at his side, a silver-haired donor behind him, and the hotel manager trailing half a pace back. He took one look at me and stopped so suddenly the others nearly walked into him. The color left his face first, then the smile. Then whatever little story he had been telling himself about the evening. "Mr. Mercer," the hotel manager said, lowering his head slightly. "The board is already assembled upstairs." But it wasn't the hotel manager that made my wife go cold. It was Adrian Mercer himself. Because Adrian, my wife's polished, admired, impossible to stop talking about boss, stared at me like a man who had just watched the floor give way beneath his own feet. Then, in a voice suddenly stripped of all confidence, he said the words my wife never imagined hearing. "Good evening, Chairman Vaughn." Beside me, Elena stopped breathing, not metaphorically, not poetically. Actually, I felt her hand slide away from my sleeve, as if she'd touched something electric. Her head turned toward me slowly, carefully, like if she moved too fast, the whole world around her might crack. "Chairman," she said. I didn't answer right away. I looked at Adrian. Then I looked at my wife. Then at the wedding ring she had just asked me to hide. And I said the only thing that felt worth saying. "You were worried about the wrong embarrassment. If you believe the quiet ones are the most dangerous people to underestimate, stay with me." Because Elena thought she was ashamed of a man with an ordinary paycheck and an ordinary life. What she didn't know, not yet, was that I had paid for the degree hanging in her office, cleared the debts that kept her father awake for 7 straight winters, and signed the compensation package of the man she was sleeping with. And that was only the part she could survive hearing. The rest nearly broke her. My name is Daniel Vaughn. I was 47 years old the night my wife asked me to hide my wedding ring in a hotel lobby, 'cause it made her look less important. And up until that exact moment, she believed something about me that half the city believed too. That I was a driver, not a bad one, not an unreliable one, just a driver. The man in the slate gray courtesy van who moved patients between the rehabilitation wing and the specialty clinic on the North Campus. The one who remembered names, adjusted wheelchairs without being asked, carried extra umbrellas in the back during spring storms, and drank black coffee from the same dented thermos every morning at 6:15. The man people thanked politely and forgot by lunchtime. I never corrected them. There are men who need to announce what they own every time they walk into a room. I was not raised by those men. My grandfather built Vaughn Hill Partners with 1 neighborhood clinic, 2 folding chairs in a waiting room, and a mortgage he was still paying off when my father was born. My father expanded it into a regional network of hospitals, outpatient centers, and community health programs. When he died, the board wanted a public successor, a polished face, a television-ready steward of the brand. What they got instead was me. Quiet, watchful, allergic to applause, and more interested in the way a janitor was treated on the night shift than the way my name looked etched on donor glass. I became chairman at 38, and the first this did was keep my name out of every hallway that didn't need it. The second thing I did was start spending 2 mornings a week driving one of our courtesy vans under a different title, not because I needed the job, but because I wanted to know what people said when Power wasn't in the room wearing a tie. You learn more from loading docks than boardrooms if you listen long enough. You learn who speaks kindly to tired people, who notices invisible work, who lies when no one important is watching, and eventually, if you're patient enough, you learn exactly what kind of woman you married. Elena hadn't always been cruel. That's the part people misunderstand about these endings. They think betrayal announces itself early, waving flags, leaving obvious footprints. But most betrayals begin in smaller places. In the first time someone introduces you with hesitation. In the first laugh that lands a little too hard at your expense. In the first dinner where your spouse speaks around you instead of to you, because the company at the table matters more than your dignity. When I married Elena, she was 29, bright, funny, restless, and carrying more hunger than peace. She had grown up watching money leave every room her family ever walked into. Her father, Luis Navarro, ran a neighborhood print shop that should have survived and didn't. Her mother cleaned dental offices on weekends. Elena had talent, intelligence, and a fear so deep she rarely named it out loud. She was terrified of being overlooked. At first, I admired the fire in her. Later, I realized she had mistaken being seen for being valued. We met at a hospital volunteer event 12 years earlier, back when she was doing intake paperwork part-time and taking night classes she could barely afford. She liked that I listened more than I spoke. I liked that she could make tired people laugh without making anyone else small in the process. Or maybe that part came later. Maybe I just failed to notice the early shape of it. We married in a small chapel with 23 guests, and a cake my mother insisted on frosting herself, because she didn't trust bakeries that charged too much and cared too little. Elena cried when she said her vows. So did I. To this day, I don't think those tears were fake. I think people can mean forever and still become strangers to the promise later. For the first few years, we were good, not glamorous, not the kind of couple strangers turn and admire, but shared rent, burnt toast, inside jokes, hands touching in the kitchen without reason. I helped her study for certification exams. She ironed my shirts badly and laughed every time I pretended to complain. We built a life from small things, and for a while, small things were enough. Then opportunity found her, and fear found a better suit to wear. It started with a graduate business program she wanted and could not afford. I still remember the night she brought it up. She stood in our kitchen, holding the admissions packet like it might disappear if she set it down too hard. "It's stupid," she said. "I shouldn't even think about it. The tuition alone is insane." "It's not stupid," I told her. "You want it. That matters. Wanting expensive things has never been my strongest financial strategy." I smiled. "Then let's make room for one reckless dream." She laughed at that. But 2 days later, she withdrew the application fee from our savings and mailed it with a look on her face I had not seen since our wedding day. Hope. What Elena never knew was that I had called the Educational Trust attached to one of our family foundations the same afternoon and arranged a private scholarship in her name, routed through a leadership grant for women in healthcare administration. Anonymous. Clean, no personal strings, no note, no hidden camera waiting for gratitude. I didn't want her indebted to me. I wanted her free enough to become who she could be. When the award letter arrived, she read it 3 times at the table and then started crying. "Daniel," she said, laughing through it, "I got it. I actually got it." "You earned it," I said. And I meant that too. The program changed everything for her. She got sharper, more polished, more ambitious. She learned how to carry herself in boardrooms, how to manage teams, how to speak in clean, expensive language about growth and visibility and strategic positioning. She climbed faster than anyone expected. First communications manager, then director, then senior strategy liaison, reporting directly to the executive office. That was where Adrian Mercer entered the story in a way that mattered. Adrian was 50, silver at the temples, all custom suits and controlled charm. The kind of man who remembered birthdays if they were useful and forgot names if they weren't. He was charismatic enough to make mediocrity look visionary, and just insecure enough to resent anyone who possessed real substance. To the public, Adrian was a rising star in healthcare administration. To me, he was an executive whose numbers looked too smooth, whose vendor approvals smelled faintly of performance theater, and whose appetite for admiration kept outrunning his discipline. To Elena, he was everything she thought the world respected: decisive, connected, elegant, public, visible. The first time I saw her light up because he texted after hours, I said nothing. The second time she canceled dinner because Adrian needed her eyes on a donor brief, I said nothing. The third time she corrected the way I pronounced the name of a wine in front of two of her colleagues, and then laughed. Don't mind Daniel. He lives in a simpler tax bracket. I looked at her for a long moment and realized we were standing at the edge of something neither of us had yet named. That was 8 months before the gala. The affair itself, I suspected 5 months before I could prove it. Not because I found lipstick on a collar or hotel receipts tucked in a coat pocket. Real life is rarely that generous. No, what gave her away was rhythm. Betrayal changes rhythm before it changes facts. Elena stopped being absent in obvious ways. She started being absent in careful ones. 35 minutes late, not 3 hours. A smile that arrived half a second too late. Her phone face down. Her laugh reserved for someone who wasn't in the room with me. The tone of a woman already rehearsing her exit while still sleeping in your bed. One Thursday night she came home smelling faintly of cedar cologne that wasn't mine, and expensive hotel soap we did not own. I kissed her forehead and asked how the donor dinner went. She said, "Long." That one word told me more than a confession could have. The next morning I called our general counsel, Miriam Sloan. Miriam had handled family legal matters, trust oversight, and board compliance issues for almost 11 years. She was 62, terrifyingly competent, and so economical with her words that when she said, "I'll look into it," grown men in tailored suits started checking what could legally be deleted from their inboxes. "I need discretion," I told her. "About the marriage or the company?" she asked. I was quiet a second. "That answer tells me it's both," she said. "All right. What do you need?" "Retention on executive access logs, travel reimbursements, vendor approvals tied to Mercer's office, and quietly, Miriam, no one gets tipped off. And your wife." I looked out the window toward the east parking structure where staff were changing shifts in the rain. "My wife," I said, "still has every opportunity to tell me the truth." Miriam didn't argue. That's one thing I appreciated about her. She didn't confuse restraint with weakness. She understood timing. She understood that sometimes a man does not stay quiet because he is lost. Sometimes he stays quiet because he is measuring the room before he chooses where to place the weight. What came back over the next 6 weeks was enough to sicken me, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed how little respect either of them had for the life they were moving through. Late-night office entries on floors Elena had no reason to be on. Car service invoices billed through executive discretionary accounts. A boutique consulting vendor receiving inflated payments tied to Mercer's discretionary budget. A retention bonus package Adrian had pushed aggressively through compensation review for essential continuity during expansion. I signed that package myself 3 months earlier, which meant, though Elena didn't know it yet, I had approved the salary and bonus structure of the man who was sleeping with my wife. If you're wondering why I didn't explode right then, why I didn't storm into his office or throw her lies on the kitchen table that same week, you're not alone. People love loud pain because it makes them feel honest, but loud pain is not always useful. I had been raised by a father who believed if a bridge is rotting, you do not jump up and down on it to prove you noticed. You clear the traffic. You inspect the load-bearing beams, and then you decide whether to repair it, close it, or let it come down on your terms. So I waited, and in waiting, I learned even more. Elena wasn't just having an affair. She was becoming someone who needed that affair to confirm the story she had started telling herself, that she had outgrown me, that she was meant for rooms where my quiet clothes and ordinary routines looked like a mistake, that whatever steadiness I offered her came at the cost of her own importance. She did not yet know that the ordinary routine she found so embarrassing included bi-weekly review sessions on hospital financials, private board votes, community grant approvals, and direct oversight of the compensation structures that paid half the executives she admired. She would, just not when she wanted to. The gala at the Halston Grand was meant to celebrate the expansion of our West Campus Oncology Center. Elena had spent 3 weeks planning speaking points, seating charts, donor packets, and on-stage transitions. Adrian was hosting. I was scheduled to appear privately for the board session on the upper floor before making a short public acknowledgement later in the evening. Elena did not know that last part because I had never once discussed board scheduling with her. I had long since learned that intimacy and disclosure are not the same thing. She invited me only after the event team insisted spouses were welcome. Even then, she tried twice to talk me out of attending. "You'd be bored," she said. "It'll be all hospital politics. You don't know anyone there." That last one nearly made me laugh. Instead, I wore a dark suit, the same wedding ring I had worn for 12 years, and arrived exactly on time. The moment at the elevator was the first crack, but it was not the hardest one. No. The hardest one came 20 minutes later in the private board lounge upstairs, when Elena walked in carrying a revised donor folder. Still pale, still trying to convince herself she had misunderstood what happened in the lobby. The room fell quiet when she saw me seated at the head of the table. Not near it, at it. Adrian was standing to my left, visibly unraveling behind the eyes. 2 trustees were flipping through agenda binders. Miriam was reviewing a compliance packet. Our chief financial officer gave Elena the sympathetic look people reserve for someone whose life is changing faster than they can process in public. She looked at the nameplate in front of me, then at me, then back at the nameplate. "Daniel," she said. No one in that room had ever heard her say my name like that before. Not because it was tender, because it was frightened. "You can leave the materials there," Miriam said gently. Elena didn't move. "You're the chairman?" she asked. I met her eyes. Yes. Her mouth opened, but no words came. What can a person really say in a moment like that? "Sorry I was ashamed of you. Sorry I told my lover your ring made me look poor. Sorry the man I thought was beneath me has apparently been above the whole room the entire time." None of those are first draft sentences. So she said nothing. I could have humiliated her then. God knows the room offered me the stage for it. But humiliation is easy when the audience is already leaning forward. And I had never been interested in easy. "Leave the folder, Elena," I said quietly. "We'll talk later." She set the materials down with shaking hands and walked out before the silence could finish swallowing her whole. Adrian did not look at her as she left. That, more than anything, told me exactly how transactional he had always been. If you've ever watched someone realize too late that the person they were using was never actually powerful enough to save them, then you know the look that passes across a face in moments like that. It isn't heartbreak, it's recalculation. The board meeting lasted 43 minutes. The marriage lasted another 8 days. At home that night, Elena was waiting in the kitchen when I returned. No makeup, now no polished voice, no executive posture, just a woman leaning both hands against the counter, like the room had tilted beneath her. And she was trying not to slide. "How long," she asked, before I could set down my keys. "How long what? How long have you been lying to me?" I almost answered quickly. Then I stopped, because that question from her carried an audacity so pure it deserved to be examined in full. "You first," I said. She blinked. "What? How long have you been sleeping with Adrian?" The skin at her throat moved when she swallowed. So there it was, not denial, not outrage, just the frightened pause of someone deciding whether truth is still useful. "It's not," she started. "It's not what you think." That sentence should be retired permanently from the language. Nothing sincere has ever arrived after it. I think I said that my wife asked me to hide my ring tonight because she was embarrassed to be seen with me. I think the man she was trying to impress looked like he'd seen a ghost when he realized who I was. And I think if you're about to tell me a story that requires me to become stupid for it to work, we should save each other the time. She sat down hard at the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't ask." That hurt her. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. What was I supposed to think? She shot back suddenly, anger flaring to cover shame. "You drove a van, Daniel. You worked odd hours. You never said anything. You let people assume whatever they wanted. I let strangers assume, I said. I didn't expect my wife to confuse humility with worthlessness. The silence after that was long enough to hear the refrigerator hum. She started crying first. Not loudly. Elena was never loud with pain. She cried the way people do when they still want some part of themselves to look composed. One hand over her mouth, shoulders tight, eyes refusing to lift. I made a mistake, she said. That word again. Mistake, such a gentle word for premeditated betrayal. A mistake is using the wrong key, I said. This was a decision, repeatedly made. She looked up then, hurt flashing through her tears. You think I'm some monster? No, I said softly. Monsters are easy. You're worse in a way. You are ordinary enough to know better. She broke a little at that. I almost hated myself for seeing it, almost. Then I thought of the elevator, the ring, the phrase people who matter, and the pity passed. She slept in the guest room that night. The next morning she left early. By noon, Miriam had a draft separation agreement ready if I wanted it. I told her not yet, because there were still things Elena needed to hear from me before the lawyers took over. And there was one thing Adrian Mercer needed to hear from himself. Before we get there, I need to tell you about Elena's father. Luis Navarro was a proud man with the kind of hands that carried ink in the creases, no matter how much he scrubbed. He owned a print shop for 26 years and made the mistake a lot of honest men make once they reach their 50s. He believed the world owed loyalty back to people who had given it. It doesn't. When online contracts replaced local runs and one bad equipment lease rolled into another, his shop started sinking. Elena knew he was struggling. She did not know how badly. 3.5 years ago, Luis was $92,000 from losing everything. I found out because his accountant, who also happened to serve on one of our community's small business panels, flagged a restructuring request that crossed my desk under a separate nonprofit lending arm. The name hit me and I looked deeper. Loans behind, vendor pressure rising, personal guarantees attached to the house, and pride thick enough to kill a rescue if approached the wrong way. So I arranged it quietly, a debt buyout through a neighborhood stabilization fund, reworked terms, equipment payoff, operating cushion, no publicity, no family drama. His books were cleaned, his pressure eased, and he was told only that a private community donor believed local print businesses mattered. Luis cried when he heard. Elena never knew. He wanted to tell her once. I know because he called me that Sunday and said, "A man should be thanked for this." I told him, a daughter should sleep without feeling like her father is drowning. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "You love her more than she understands." I remember looking at the kitchen window while he said it, watching Elena laugh at something on television from the other room, and answering, "I know." That memory would come back to me later with more ache than satisfaction. 3 days after the gala, I asked Elena to meet me in the library at our house at 7 that evening. Not the kitchen, not the bedroom, the library. There are rooms where marriages are lived, and rooms where they are autopsied. I wanted the second kind. When she arrived, I already had the folder on the table, dark blue, simple, thick enough to alter a pulse. She saw it and stopped in the doorway. "What is that?" "The part of our life you never bothered to see." She sat slowly. I slid the first document toward her. Her graduate scholarship records, award sort, Vaughn Family Leadership Initiative, authorization signature, Daniel E. Vaughn. Elena frowned at first, like the letters themselves were in the wrong order. Then understanding hit. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. You remember the letter you got?" I asked. "The one you cried over in the kitchen?" She didn't answer. "I arranged it the day you mailed your application." Her eyes filled immediately. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Because that seems to be the question people ask only after truth stops flattering them." "Because I wanted your pride intact," I said. "I wanted you to believe the world had met you fairly, just once." She pressed a hand to her chest. I slid the second stack toward her. Debt restructuring forms. Original liabilities tied to Luis Navarro Print and Design. Private intervention records, escrow releases, home preservation clauses. Again, my signature. Elena stared so long at the numbers I wondered if she had stopped understanding them as language and started seeing them as judgment. "Dad said a donor helped," she whispered. "Yes," her head lifted slowly. "You paid his debts. I kept him from losing the shop and the house. How much, it doesn't matter. How much, Daniel? 92,000 and change. She made a sound then, not a sob, not quite a word. Just the raw noise a person makes when a version of themselves they have been living inside suddenly becomes unbearable. You did that, she said, and you never told me. No, why? Because I was your husband, I said, and for the first time my voice nearly broke. That was enough reason. She bent forward, both hands over her face now, shoulders shaking. I let the silence work. Then I placed the third document in front of her. Executive compensation approval. Adrian Mercer, base salary, performance bonus, retention grant, chairman authorization, Daniel E. Vaughn. That was the one that finished her. Her hands dropped away from her face, and she stared at the paper like it had struck her. I said it for her because she could not. Yes, I told her. I paid your degree. I paid your father's debts. And I signed the package that paid your lover. She actually recoiled. Not physically far. Just enough for a person to show they no longer trusted the space between themselves and the truth. Don't. My voice was calm again, too calm maybe. You don't get to say my name like you're the one in pain without understanding why I'm no longer willing to rescue you from it. She started apologizing then, fast, messy. Not strategic this time, just desperate. I was wrong, I was ashamed, and I was stupid, and I got caught up in visibility? Flattery? The thrill of being chosen by a man who looked expensive. She said nothing. You did not cheat on a poor man, Elena. You cheated on the only man in your life who had already been carrying burdens you never even knew existed. That landed. It had to. There are some sentences no defense survives. If you think she begged me then, you're right, she did. Not immediately. First she cried. Then she denied that Adrian meant anything real. Then she said she'd end it. Then she said she'd go to counseling. Then she said she'd quit her job. Then, when all of those offers hit the same wall, she slid to the floor beside the chair and held the edge of the table like the world had become too unstable to trust. Please, she whispered, please give me a chance to fix this. I looked at her for a long time. 12 years of mourning sat between us, coffee cups, doctor appointments, Christmas lights that never stayed working on the first try, her father's laugh, my mother's birthday dinners, the first apartment, the little silver frame in the hallway from our honeymoon. All of it sitting there with her on that floor. All of it asking me whether one person's collapse should outweigh a whole history of love. Then the elevator came back to me. Hide it. Take off that ring, people who matter. And I knew the answer. You already fixed your future, I said quietly. You just picked the wrong man to build it on. I left her there and walked out to the back porch. I stood in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees and wondering when exactly grief turns into clarity. It is not a dramatic moment. No music swells. No voice from heaven explains the lesson. You simply notice, one breath at a time, that the person you have been protecting in your mind no longer matches the person standing in your house. And once you see that clearly, love cannot do as much as it used to. Now, if you're still with me, comment one word. Grace if you think a person can be deeply hurt and still stay dignified, or walk if you believe some betrayals should end the moment the truth comes out. I want to know where you stand. Adrian Mercer, for his part, still believed the danger was personal. That was his first mistake. His second was believing personal scandals can be contained once money has touched them. Miriam's investigation, which had begun because of my marriage, had widened because corporate rot never stops at the first stain. The vendor approvals tied to Adrian's office connected to a shell consultancy operated by a college friend. Inflated communications retainers. Donor entertainment charges disguised as outreach expenses. Internal access privileges used after hours for reasons no compliance officer enjoys discovering. By the time we called the special board session the following Thursday, his affair with my wife was no longer the largest problem in the file. It was just the ugliest. He arrived confident anyway. Men like Adrian always do. They mistake delayed consequences for proof of control. The boardroom on the 21st floor was all glass and winter light. Downtown stretched below us in sharp lines of steel and reflected cloud. He walked in with his usual polished stride, stopped when he saw the full audit committee present, and recovered quickly enough that someone inexperienced might have mistaken it for calm. Chairman, he said to me, smiling with effort, I wasn't told this would be a full committee review. You're being told now, Miriam replied. He sat. For the first 12 minutes he tried to posture through it. Vendor language, strategic necessity, administrative oversight. He blamed volume, rapid growth, delegation pressure. Then the financial controller placed 3 side-by-side invoices on the screen. Identical language, different dates, escalating amounts, same hidden beneficiary. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then Miriam played the audio, not of the affair. I never needed that kind of spectacle. No, she played the internal recording from a post-event holding room 6 weeks earlier. After Adrian thought staff had cleared out and the room mics tied to donor AV support were no longer live. His voice came through crisp and ugly. Elena's useful, the recording said. Ambitious people with working-class guilt are always useful. Give them visibility, they'll call it love. Her husband some transport guy, invisible, grateful, the usual. Once this expansion closes, I'll own this whole wing in practice. The room went dead still. No one moved. No one coughed. There is a special kind of silence reserved for moments when contempt is no longer rumored, but documented. Adrian tried once. That was private banter taken out of context. Miriam's expression did not change. The context is that you used company resources to enrich yourself, manipulated staff under your supervision, and demonstrated a conflict of interest severe enough to compromise donor trust and governance. He looked at me then, not the board, me, because men who build themselves on performance always need one final audience. Daniel, he said, shifting at last from executive polish to personal plea. Whatever happened with Elena, don't let that turn this into something it isn't. I almost admired the instinct. Even then, he wanted the room to believe this was marital revenge. So I gave him the truth as plainly as I knew how. This stopped being about Elena the moment you touched money that belonged to patient care and public trust. You were never important enough to ruin my judgment. Just my marriage. That was the end of him. The board voted for immediate termination, clawback proceedings, formal disclosure review, and referral to outside counsel. Security deactivated his credentials before he reached the elevator. As he stood to leave, stripped of title, office, access, and the illusion that charm could still save him, he turned once more like he wanted to say something clever, something final, something that would let him walk out looking less defeated than he was. Nothing came. He left without it. Some collapses deserve no soundtrack. Elena resigned the next morning. Not because I asked, because remaining would have required her to walk hallways where everyone now knew 2 things. That she had betrayed her husband with a disgraced executive, and that the husband she had once been ashamed to claim had been the quiet authority in the building all along. Shame ages a face quickly. By the 2nd week she looked 5 years older. By the 4th she stopped wearing the sharp colors she used to favor and started speaking like every sentence cost effort. The divorce moved forward. She did not contest it. That surprised our attorneys. It did not surprise me. Somewhere between the scholarship documents and Adrian's termination, Elena finally understood that what she had lost was not just a marriage or a comfortable house or a certain future. She had lost the right to tell herself she had merely made a romantic mistake. What she had done was smaller and worse. She had confused gentleness for lack. She had ranked human worth by visibility. She had measured a man's value by how loudly the world applauded when he entered a room. 3 months later, she asked if I would meet her one last time. I chose a coffee shop 2 blocks from the original clinic my grandfather built, not because I wanted symbolism, because I wanted to remember where my life had begun before I listened to how it had failed. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with both hands around a cup that had long since gone cold. She stood when she saw me, and for a second I saw the woman I had married flicker through the ruin of who she had become. "Thank you for coming," she said. I sat. She didn't, not until I nodded once. Then she lowered herself into the chair across from me and looked at me like a person standing outside a locked house, still hoping the door might open if she knocks the right way. "I know I don't deserve this," she began. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to say something true for once, even if it changes nothing." I waited. "When I started with Adrian," she said, voice shaking, "I told myself it was because you and I had grown apart. because he understood my ambition, because I felt seen. That was the clean version, the respectable version. She looked down at her hands. The ugly version is that I was ashamed of how simple you seemed. I thought if I kept rising while you stayed ordinary, then people would assume I settled. I hated that thought so much I let it turn me into someone cruel. That, more than the affair, was the confession I had needed. Not because it gave me satisfaction, because truth, when it finally comes, deserves to be named correctly. I didn't leave you for love, she said. I left because I wanted status, and when I thought I couldn't have it through you, I reached for it through someone else. I nodded slowly. Thank you for telling the truth. Tears filled her eyes. Does it matter? Yes, I said. It matters, it just doesn't save anything. She closed her eyes. One tear slipped free, then another. I would do anything to undo it. I know I was horrible to you. Yes, I didn't see you. No, I said softly. You saw exactly what I looked like. You just never cared enough to ask what held it up. She covered her face. For a minute I let her. Then I took an envelope from my coat and set it on the table. She looked at it, confused. What is that? Open it. Inside was a letter from the Vaughn Continuing Education Fund awarding full tuition support for a counseling and ethics certification program, plus a living stipend for 1 year. She stared at the page. I don't understand. It's a grant? Why would you do this? Because becoming ashamed of yourself can either finish you or educate you. I'd prefer the second. Her eyes flooded again immediately. Probably not, I said. Take it anyway. Daniel, this is not reconciliation, Elena. She nodded, crying openly now. I know, it's not even forgiveness, not fully. It's simply me refusing to let your worst decision be the only thing that remains true about either of us. She bowed her head. In that moment, I did not feel triumph. That's another lie people tell about endings like this. They imagine the injured person walks away crowned by justice, finally full. But justice is not warmth. It is not repair. It is simply the clean setting of a broken bone so it heals straight instead of twisted. I stood. For a second, my hand rested lightly on the back of the chair between us. I loved you honestly, I said. That will never embarrass me. What you did with it will have to belong to you. Then I left. I did not look back through the window. I did not need to. 6 months later, on a bright morning in early spring, I stood in the courtyard of our original clinic campus while contractors unloaded signage for a new program launch. The brass plaque read, "The Second Shift Initiative Education and Debt Relief for Spouses and Caregivers Who Held Families Together in Silence." My mother stood beside me in a navy coat. One hand looped through my arm the way she had done at my father's funeral years earlier. "You finally named it," she said. "I guess I did." She smiled. "Your father would have liked this. My father believed invisible labor held the world together. The spouse who waits, the daughter who drives, the husband who works 2 jobs and still remembers the medication refill, the woman who studies at midnight after cleaning up everyone else's day. He used to say the hardest lives are often carried by people no one would pick first in a crowded room. So we built a fund for them. Debt relief, adult education, emergency grants. Quiet support for people whose contribution never photographed well enough for brochures. Elena came to the launch. I hadn't invited her. I also hadn't told anyone to keep her away. She stood near the back, dressed simply, hair shorter than before. No trace of the woman who used to calibrate every room by who might be looking at her. When the remarks ended and the small crowd drifted toward the reception tents, she approached slowly. Her eyes moved from the plaque to me. "This existed before me, didn't it?" she asked. "Yes. For how long?" "Since the year after my father died." She nodded once, absorbing something harder than any previous revelation. Not that I had helped her. That she had never been the center of the story she thought she ruined. "I really thought," she said quietly, "that all this grace at the end was because of what happened between us." "No," I said. "What happened between us only showed you where the grace came from." That hurt her more than anger would have, because anger still grants importance. Truth does not always do that. She looked down at the plaque again, then back at me. "I hope one day I become the kind of person who would have recognized you when it mattered." I considered her for a long moment. I hope so too, and that was all. She left a minute later, walking past volunteers setting up folding chairs, past the patient garden, past the ordinary people whose lives would be changed by a fund she once believed had been built from her tragedy. It hadn't. It had been built from a philosophy much older than her betrayal, one my grandfather lived, one my father expanded, one I had nearly forgotten inside the pain of being underestimated in my own home. That people can leave you thinking you're small, and still be completely wrong about the size of your life. That some men don't need to announce what they've built because the people standing safely inside it are evidence enough. That dignity is not found in what your enemies discover too late. It is found in what you remain after the discovery changes nothing essential about who you are. So if you are the quiet one in your marriage, the overlooked one in your family, the person whose contribution gets confused for simplicity, because you don't make speeches about your own sacrifice, hear me carefully. Silence is not the same as emptiness. A modest title is not the same as a small life. And the people who rank human worth by appearance, income, polish, or applause almost always find out too late that they were measuring with the wrong instrument. Elena thought I embarrassed her in public. What really embarrassed her was the truth. The truth that the man she hid had been holding up more of her world than she ever bothered to notice. The truth that the degree on her wall came through my hand. The truth that her father slept peacefully because of money I moved in silence. The truth that the man she called exciting had been cashing checks I approved. The truth that she had not escaped beneath herself. She had betrayed above it. And if there is a lesson in all this, it isn't marry rich or trust no one or revenge wins. It's smaller than that, quieter, harder to package. Pay attention to who honors you when there is nothing obvious to gain from it. Pay attention to whether the person who says they love you also respects the parts of you the world doesn't clap for. Pay attention to the jokes that cost your dignity one laugh at a time, because marriages rarely die in one dramatic scene. Most of them die in tiny acts of contempt someone keeps excusing until the disrespect finally gets bold enough to speak clearly in a hotel lobby. Hide it. Take off that ring. You embarrass me. Sometimes a relationship doesn't end when those words are said. Sometimes it ends the day one person realizes they no longer want to be loved by someone who could say them at all. And that, more than Adrian's downfall, more than the boardroom, more than the paperwork, more than the money, was the real ending of my marriage. Not when Elena cheated, not when I exposed the truth, but when I understood that the woman I had been protecting did not know how to value what was gentle unless it came wrapped in status. From that moment on, saving the marriage would have meant helping her continue to misunderstand me. I was never willing to do that, not even for love. If this story